No one can accuse Roger Hahn of Augusta of not being involved in his community. Hahn retired this February after putting in almost 40 years of public service. There is not a position Hahn has not held in the Eau Claire County Sheriff's Department except sheriff, and he has been acting sheriff in the sheriff's absence. Hahn was the county's first detective, and he also has worked as a captain and undersheriff, and in the area of patrol, jail, and process serving. Not only has Hahn served Eau Claire County, but also he has served the City of Augusta as its police chief. Hahn first held the position in 1946 when he served a term as undersheriff. He became Augusta's police chief again in 1949, but returned to the county in 1955. From Hahn's years as police chief, he has gained a wealth of stories about his experiences in city law enforcement. With a chuckle, Hahn recalls Augusta's old jail, a small 15 by 20 foot building constructed of cement blocks. The building was located across from McAdams Heating and Plumbing on Stone Street. It was condemned by the state in the late 1950s and was torn down. The jail contained 2 cells and a potbelly stove for heating. There were no plumbing facilities, so a pail was placed in each cell. Hahn said the original jail at Augusta, which was built of wood, burnt. There never were any escapes from the jail. Not many prisoners were locked up, as it was hard to hold them in the facility. Generally, there were temporary lockups until prisoners could be transferred to Eau Claire County Jail. One time, there was an unexpected visitor at the jail. Hahn said a young lady going into labor pounded on the door at 1 a.m., and so a baby was delivered in jail by Hahn and the doctor, with Hahn doing the, quote, holding and looking. Another time, it wasn't a tiny baby, but 26 people crowded into the small jail on a disorderly conduct charge. Hahn explained a group of people were playing football on Augusta's Main Street. At the time, when the road was a main thoroughfare with as many as 14,000 automobiles and 700 trucks passing through on a summer day in a 24-hour period. When Hahn told the group to get off the street, someone made a sarcastic remark. And when no one would fess up to making it, the lot was thrown into jail. He said the group was digging nickels and dimes out of their shoes to pay the $25 fine, but eventually they got out. Probably the most embarrassing experience Hahn had was when he locked himself in a jail cell. Hahn had to call the sheriff's department, and the deputy who let him out always used to remind him of the time he locked himself in his own jail. Another amusing incident which Hahn relates is when late one evening he received a call from the Eau Claire County Sheriff's Department to stop a particular car in which the driver had left a gas station without his wife. Apparently, she had been sleeping in the back, and when she got up and went to the restroom, her husband had come out after paying for the gas and had taken off. So the husband had to, quote, go sputtering back to Eau Claire. There were always deer hunters getting lost in the Fairchild area. Hahn said one time a search party was organized which looked for a missing hunter half the night until someone asked if the man's home had been called, and it was discovered that he had been at home for a long time, but his wife had neglected to call. Law enforcement history. Hahn said that he has pondered over the city's old ordinance book that is since repealed, which listed the duties of the city marshal. One of the marshal's duties was to go to the mill pond to see that boys over 7 years of age had on swimsuits. Other duties listed for the marshal included making sure that young ladies undressing had their shades down, that trains going through town traveled no faster than 15 miles per hour, and that chickens were not allowed to run at large. Back then, there was no ordinance for dogs running loose. However, Hahn said he never had the pleasure of enforcing any of these old rules. One interesting part of Augusta's law enforcement history is that the city had the first black officer in Eau Claire County. Hahn said the officer, John Drain, was a former slave who came to Augusta after the Civil War in the late 1800s. Drain was the night officer who would meet the train coming through Augusta and escort people uptown. Also, he would light kerosene lamps and look for fires, Hahn added. Drain was quite a fellow, and most people who knew him said he was a fine man, Hahn said. The officer died in 1930 and is buried in Augusta's East Lawn Cemetery. Zella Hiltz of Augusta donated a gravestone for the grave and received help in setting it up from Thelma Hiltz and Arnold Works, Hahn noted. Another part of the city's history is the Augusta area used to be quite a lumberjack area, and the lumberjacks would come into town and let off steam, Hahn said, noting that there were fights in the pool halls, and if someone got too unruly, he was rapped on the head with a pool cue. Hahn noted one officer hired in the morning quit at night after his head was beaten with a pool cue. Also, Hahn noted another branch of city government in the past. A former Justice of the Peace, P.M. Zempel, used to hold court in his confectionery store, which was located where the Augusta Laundry is now. Court costs were assessed at $2. One thing that hasn't changed over the years is kids and their antics on Halloween, Hahn said. There were always outhouses tipped over in the city, and the next day the boys would be gathered up at school and would have to tip up the outhouses. No one was hurt. It was a lot of clean fun, Hahn said. Hahn has noticed a general rebelling against authority by young people. He noted some of the changes in recent years are that more youths have access to automobiles and that there is more involvement with harder liquors and drugs. Hahn said back in 1946, people never heard of drugs here, and he doesn't think many officers in the area had seen them. He said the drug problem is hard to curb, and he doesn't know what the answer is going to be, but the problem is not getting better. Also, Hahn noted when he first came to town, he knew all the people, plus the dogs and cats. Now he does not know 3/4 of the people, and he doesn't know if that is good or bad, he said. Hahn commented on the fun that used to be had in the city, including ice cream socials on churchyards and celebrations on the 4th of July and on Memorial Day. Saturday night was always shopping night, and there used to be a lot of people in town then, he observed. Makes first arrest. The first person Hahn arrested was the then mayor, who paid a $7 fine for running a stop sign. The most common arrests Hahn made were local people running arterials and travelers passing through speeding. There were no major crimes committed while Hahn was police sheriff, although he noted that one time a city service station was held up and one person was cracked on the head. There were a lot of burglaries Hahn investigated, although he noted during one 3-year stretch in the early 1950s, there were no traffic fatalities or burglaries. One time, Hahn remembers he was checking doors about 2 a.m. during the winter and reached for a tavern door when he fell on a man on his hands and knees picking the lock. Hahn said he had to wrestle with the man while he was wearing a heavy overcoat with his gun underneath the coat, which taught him a lesson. There were 3 police officers when Hahn started, but at one time the number was cut down to 1. Also, he noted that prior to his coming to Augusta, the city never had an official police car, so everything was done on foot, or else the city paid for the gas and siren on the officer's personal car. Eventually, a squad was purchased, and there have been squads since, so the department could enforce the law as the officers could get around the community, he added. When Hahn was hired, the city wanted traffic law rigidly enforced, as there used to be a lot of traffic, he said. He observed the post office used to be on the main street, and people had a habit of double parking, which would create a problem. Hahn said when he started working, there was the same problem then as there is now, with fractions for and against the police, which, quote, hasn't changed in 40 years that I'm aware of. There were, quote, trials and tribulations with the city council, the same as now, Hahn said. Quote, back then the council was interested in having a custodian to cut grass, shovel, and read meters. I told them I didn't hire out as a custodian. He added one of his officers used to sweep out the library and city hall, but the police department does not do this now. There have been many mayors serving and many people, all nice, on the city council, whether in the past, present, or future, Hahn said, adding the majority have the welfare of the community at stake. All have been nice to work for. I've enjoyed all the city councils, Hahn said. He added, it's hard for anyone in a small community to hold public office. Hahn said he only had one philosophy while he was chief. He was hired to do the job the best he could, and that the law was meant for you as well as the other guys. He added he treated everyone the same and fairly and never had any real problems.